My parents were gardeners all their lives and owned two plots. One of them was an area of 20 acres on which plants and trees were grown for sale. This is approximately equal to 26 football fields. Of course, on this site, there were buildings for storing machinery, tools, and fuel, rooms for employees and toilets. 20 people worked there. The center brought profit. We trade as Willow's Garden Center. This plot was only 8 acres. All plants and trees were sold here, as well as all kinds of garden furniture. You know what I'm talking about, so I won't list it. Mom and Dad started me late. They sent me to horticulture school so I could one day run a business. My name is David Willows. I am the only son of my parents. Yes, I was one of those lucky ones who was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I studied hard and qualified in horticulture. I also attended business school to learn how to make money. One day, I went to other garden centers to see what they were doing, which was checking out our competitors. I was walking backwards and ran into a girl, and so I fell in love at first sight. I visited the center 6 more times, and eventually we started dating. She didn't know who I was, and I decided to keep it a secret. I was then 23 years old. 6 months into our relationship, I asked her to marry me if she agreed. Her name was Nancy. Nancy Summers. In my eyes, she was the most beautiful girl in the world. The next year, we got married. My father had a good opinion of people. He was a little wary, but didn't say anything to me. Mom and Dad hosted 2 social events during the Christmas holidays, one 2 days before Christmas and one on New Year's Eve. All employees were invited to both events. The first was a traditional Christmas lunch with free drinks. The second was a buffet with free drinks. It was a thank you for all the work they had done over the past year. This was reflected in profits. Mom and Dad constantly communicated with the guests. I also had to do the same. There were 4 gardeners my age. All 4 were married to attractive women. They wore low-cut dresses that showed off their breasts, but not so much that they fell out. These 4 women talked to me constantly, just as they had all the years before. But now I am married to Nancy. They wanted to get me into bed. Nancy knew what they were up to. She managed to interrupt the conversation, which I was glad about. Mom and Dad retired, and the business was taken over by me. Nancy was supposed to be involved in the affairs of the center, but she was not interested in anything. She remained aloof. Mom and Dad made a fortune. I wanted to earn even more. My business head was working at full capacity. Money flowed like a river every day. I needed to leave for 2 days, just to a neighboring city. It was the beginning of spring, the 1st of March. I made new contacts and enjoyed the last few days. Returning home from a nearby town, it was evening when the heavens opened up. Rain poured down the windshield of the car. Visibility was very poor and dark due to continuous rain. I was slowed down by the weather. It did not help. I had an accident and woke up in the hospital. I was in bad shape. I could see, hear, and pronounce individual words. I had control of my right arm and upper legs. I figured it out. I stayed in the hospital for 3 months until the end of May. The doctors did everything possible for me. Then they sent me home to be looked after by Nancy. They told Nancy that I would be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. Not the best news. Nancy was heartbroken, but we were married. She wasn't a nurse. She had her own work that she kept doing to keep her mind occupied. We hired a part-time nurse to care for me while Nancy was at work. Her name was Allison Jenkins, and she was my age. Allison constantly talked to me, trying to get me to talk and not just blink my eyes. Once no, twice yes. The center could not leave my mind. It had to be run by someone I could trust. I didn't want Mom and Dad to come back. They had already done their job. It was supposed to be managed by my manager. I got Allison's attention by trying to write with my right hand. "Do you want to write something down?" Allison asked. I blinked twice. A pen and paper appeared in front of me. Allison placed the tray of food on my lap and held the paper. I wrote the name and telephone number of my lawyer, asking him to come to our house as soon as possible. Allison helped me write down notes for the meeting with the lawyer the next day. I wrote that my manager should run the company for me, with a big increase in salary, and that I wanted to see him every week so that he could report on the state of affairs and hire an accountant if necessary. The next day, the manager and my lawyer came to my home. They were both shocked to see me in a wheelchair. The new contract was signed by me and my manager. I gave him a note saying that only I could sign receipts for goods. He agreed and was pleased with the salary increase. In the first week, the grass grew. The trees needed to be trimmed. Nancy organized everything, bringing in the center's workers to take care of our garden. One of the men lingered, talking to Nancy. I'd like to hear what they were talking about. It's time for Allison to leave. Nancy had to take care of me until the morning. In the second week, the center workers came again. It's time for Allison to leave. Time for Nancy to take care of me until the morning. The men were in the house, allegedly washing dishes before leaving. 3 of them left, but 1 remained. This was the one Nancy had talked to last week. They seemed to know each other well. I couldn't be left alone. You could say that I was a living dead, a zombie, a vegetable in a chair. My life was on the verge of destruction that night because of what I was about to see with my own eyes. This is what I was to see and hear for the next 45 minutes. One of the men, his name was Jake. This was the one Nancy had talked to last week. They had sex in front of me. Nancy could see the hatred, anger, rage, and fury in my eyes the whole time, but she didn't care. I tried to say, "Get away from my wife, you bastard," but it didn't work. I had to sit and wait and watch. 3 days passed, and the 4 men returned again. When Allison left, 2 of the men left for some reason, but Jake and Tom stayed. Jake told Tom what he did to Nancy last time. Tom wanted to do this too. Here I was sitting in my chair. The next week was twice as bad. The 4 of them finished and waited for Allison to leave. I wanted to get better as quickly as possible. The only person who could help me was Allison. All I had in my head was hatred and revenge for these 4 men. They will pay for it one day. Weeks passed and everything was the same. As soon as Allison left, Allison did everything for me. She took me to the toilet, brushed my teeth, shaved, and bathed me. Allison and I got along well. Although I couldn't speak, I tried my best to speak. But she worked with me every day, trying to get me to talk. When she started courting me, she gave me a shower. She was wearing a swimsuit. She had a fantastic body, I must say. Over time, I began to speak. All thanks to Allison. I asked Allison to keep it a secret. I wanted to surprise Nancy one fine day. She will get hers in full. These 4 still came twice a week, although the garden didn't need that much attention. All they wanted was sex with Nancy. Rub my nose in this because although I couldn't have sex, now my prostitute wife was ready for it. I swore that I would take revenge on the 5 of them as soon as I recovered, but I didn't know when this would happen. One day, while Allison and I were in the shower in July, a shock shot through my entire body. I fainted. Allison quickly called an ambulance, and here I was again lying on my back. In the hospital, where they probed me from all sides. "Can you feel it?" asked the doctor. "Can you move your left arm?" asked the doctor. "Can you move your toes?" asked the doctor. I wiggled my toes on both feet and lifted each foot in turn. "Mr. Willows, you will stay in the hospital for a week. I want to run some tests," the doctor said. Allison was there, caring for me, just like everyone else. The only people I spoke to were the hospital staff and Allison. When Nancy came to see me, I pretended I couldn't talk, just blink at her. It worked great. Allison removed me from the bed as soon as the staff left the room. She helped me start walking, but my legs were weak. I ate high-protein foods in the morning, afternoon, and evening. I wanted to get my powers back as soon as possible. Allison would sneak food for me. She knew what she was doing for me. My strength is back thanks to Allison. Nancy didn't even notice it. Her thoughts were focused on returning home to have sex with these idiots. Finally, I was discharged and sent home in my chair. Allison pushed me. Nancy had no idea that I could move because I asked the doctors not to tell her about my recovery. Nancy went to work, leaving Allison and I alone every day. I asked Allison to buy me a small video camera. I had to wait for 4 men to come and take care of the garden. I didn't tell Allison what Nancy was doing when she left. She thought she was caring for her loving husband. This was far from the truth, which she could not imagine. I didn't have to wait long when 4 gardeners appeared. They arrived 2 days later. I filmed the entire scene. Now I know the names of all 4: Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim. I sat silently, pretending that I was still in a coma. They returned 2 days later. I filmed it again. How wrong she was. Allison did a great job for me, both physically and mentally. Finally, my strength returned. It was time to act. I had 6 options for Nancy: throw her out onto the street, leave her and live with Allison, get a divorce so she doesn't get any money, make her have sex with more men, send her on a plane without money. It's time to tell Allison what Nancy did when she left. We already had one secret. The next one will be even better. What can I do to help? But it might cost a little, Allison said. I asked Allison, what do you mean? Open a coffee shop for me. That's all I ask as a thank you, Allison said. Agreed, I replied. Allison turned out to be the best thing that happened in my life. Besides being the best nurse anyone could ask for, she was a great organizer and detective. I asked Allison to find out where the wives of Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim worked, and to see if they were going to school for the week. By late September-October, Allison had some answers. I had 3 months to carry out my evil plans before the Christmas party, which was to take place in 12 weeks. It was time to take the first step. I returned to work downtown and Allison was next to me, pushing my chair. This was my cover from everyone. My manager was surprised at how good I looked, but Nancy was blind to my health. The manager and I got down to business. While I was away, he checked the sales of trees and plants over the past year. He noted that there was something wrong with expensive trees and plants, so he checked previous years. There have been significant stock shortages over the past 4 years. He checked it. We looked at purchases and sales. There was a significant difference. We were losing money. I told him that Mom and Dad allowed a certain percentage of losses each year, and that we sold the trees and plants that wouldn't survive at a 10% discount off the full price. The only place the trees were was on the 20-acre site before they were moved downtown. I felt a rat. It was not a 4-legged rat, but a 2-legged one. I told my manager to install a recording system on a 20-acre property in the locker rooms and restrooms. He asked why this was necessary, and I replied that I had my suspicions. He organized this, and the system was installed overnight. It cost money, but I hoped it would be worth it. The recording discs were changed every night. We didn't have to wait long. Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim were having lunch. Tom was the main speaker at that moment. You know, Jake, it was a great idea to sell those expensive trees at the local market to your friend at half price. How long have we been doing this? 4 years, right? Said Tom. Jake, Tony, and Jim supported him. Yes, Jake, that was a great idea. I wouldn't have been able to buy all these expensive things if it weren't for you, Jake, they said. Yes, let this last for many more years. And don't forget, guys, we're going to Nancy's again tonight. Yes, these 4 came to my house again. Now I didn't care about Nancy, I wanted revenge. The man handed the recordings over to the manager. He gave them to me. After listening to the recordings, I realized that I had a trump card against them for theft. I put the notes in a safe for future use. It took Allison another 2 weeks to find out where the wives of these 4 were going to school. All for different weeks, with a difference of 1 or 2 weeks. Jake's wife went first. Allison knew the name of the hotel and the room number. Allison drove me home. I remained in the chair. The 4 bastards have come again. After they left, I wrote Nancy a note. It said that I was going on a business trip for a week in 2 weeks. Allison had to come with me because she is my nurse. Nancy nodded and agreed. She was going to cheat with 4 men for a week. I did not care. 2 weeks passed. Allison drove me to the airport, still pretending I was in a chair. Allison went on a well-deserved week's vacation at my expense. We left a chair at the airport for our return. I ended up at the same hotel where Jake's wife, Amy, was staying. We had rooms on the same floor as hers, and I installed cameras in both rooms just in case. I waited for her to go to dinner. I followed her a few steps behind. "Hey, Amy, what are you doing here?" I said with surprise in my voice. "Hey, David, I'm on a work course for the week. What are you doing here?" She replied with a sexy look. "I'm here on business for the week, too. I'm going to dinner. Are you having dinner with your friends?" I asked with a smile. "No, I was going to dinner alone," Amy replied. "Well, you can join me if you want," I offered. Amy's eyes lit up, and so did mine. We had dinner and drank 2 bottles of wine. We went up to our rooms. When we reached the door, Amy invited me to come in for a glass of something strong. This was my chance. It was about 10. I hugged her as soon as I locked the door. I got what I wanted. My name was written down. The sex was filmed. She said she wants my body every week when we get home. I told her she would get it every week. The last words we said to each other were, "See you in the evening." 4 nights passed in this manner. During the last breakfast, I collected the tapes from the front desk after I paid the bill, including the cost of installing and removing the cameras. We headed home on Saturday, planning our next meeting. When I got home to the airport, Allison was waiting for me. She wanted to tell me something. She was jumping for joy. She said she had met the man of her dreams. Our sexual relationship has to stop, but she is not against casual sex from time to time. She then asked me if our deal with the coffee shop was still valid. I told her that she could open a coffee shop, a restaurant, or even 2 coffee shops for all she had done for me. We returned home pretending I was still in the chair for Nancy. Naturally, she had sex every day with 4 of them. I did not care. A week later, I did the same with Jim's wife, June. She turned out to be a tigress in bed. I now had 2 weeks to change my routine. The first thing I did was copy all the recordings. Then I made a special one for the Christmas party in 2 weeks. I visited Amy, Jill, Beth, and June to do 3 things. First, have sex with them, then ask them to marry me if they divorced their husbands. I lied when I said I would have divorce papers ready for them. I asked all 4 to serve them to their husbands. They all happily agreed to get rid of their traitors. I have prepared the documents. I was in my lawyer's office with Allison, still pretending I was in the chair. I wanted the divorce papers to be ready for the Christmas party, and Nancy will only get what I decide. I went to the bank and changed the bank details for our house. Now it's time to show Nancy that I don't need the chair anymore. I can walk and talk. On Monday evening, Nancy returned from work. She was expecting a night full of sex with 4 men. Nancy changed into a dress, waiting for the knock on the door. There was a knock. Nancy let them in. I sat in a chair waiting for them. "Nancy, let's get started," Jake said to Nancy. This was my signal. I stood up from my chair with my father's gun in my hands, pointed at Jake. "Take off your clothes, guys," I said, waving a pistol at each of them. They undressed. "Now to the door," I said. "It's cold outside," Jake said. "You will be even colder than dead. It's your choice. By the way, I didn't intend to kill you, but I want my wife back. So forget what you've been doing these past months," I said. I lied, of course. With these words, the 4 ran out of the house naked. It was cold outside. I turned to Nancy. She was scared to death. This is what I told her. "So, you had a lot of fun with those 4 bastards. You laughed at me. I have plans for us, but they will wait until next year. Then we will sort out our marriage." That calmed Nancy a little. She thought that everything would work out. She tried for the rest of the week to persuade me to have sex with her. She didn't stand a chance. I told her I wasn't ready to have sex with her. My doctor advised me to abstain for another month. I invited Allison and her boyfriend to the Christmas party so they could watch Nancy while I gave my presentation. Nancy and I got dressed for the party. I took special notes with me. We walked into the hotel as if we were a happy couple. The evening began with dinner. After dinner, it was time for my presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to bore you. This year, I want to show you an edited recording, which I think you'll find interesting, I said. I've included the edited footage of Jake. He and Nancy were the first to appear on screen, then Tom, then Tony and Jim. Nancy tried to get up and run out of the room, but to do this, two healthy men were sitting next to her. They held her down, forcing her to watch the recording. Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim also wanted to run away. Wait, guys, sit down. I have another tape for you. This is an edited tape of Amy, Jill, Beth, and June, and me. Here I am, having sex with each of them. Amy, Jill, Beth, and June screamed in shock. Then four men came forward with divorce papers in their hands. Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim received their copies in front of everyone. Nancy also received her divorce papers. With these words, Allison stood up and shouted loudly, "You damn cheating woman of easy virtue." Nancy had no choice but to hang her head in shame and cry. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the show is over. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. There are plenty of drinks here, help yourself. Have a good rest. I'll see you at the New Year's party, I said. Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim stood up and quickly left with their wives. Nancy, what do you want to do? Stay at the hotel. Or come home with me, it, quote, as your choice, I said. I headed towards the exit. Nancy ran after me. We got into a taxi. She cried all the way home and repeated, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I wasn't in the mood to talk to Nancy, so I went to bed and locked the door. The next day, the situation was even colder than outside. I went to work and finished the final preparations for my plan. I called the real estate agent and asked him to appraise the house. They said they could do it today since it was the last working day before Christmas. I said I'd be home in 30 minutes. They arrived on time. They valued the house at $500,000. I said I'd put it up for sale for $250,000. I wanted a quick sale. The house was in my name and Nancy couldn't do anything about it. On Christmas Day, I went to see my aging parents for lunch. I asked Nancy if she wanted to come with me. She said, "Please, let's pretend we're a loving couple." "I don't think I can, but I'll try," I replied. We went to my parents' house for lunch. Mom gave us a wonderful dinner with all the delicacies. Throughout the day, Nancy and I talked through my parents. Nancy helped Mom in the kitchen. I cleared the table, filled the sink with water, and downloaded the dishwasher. Then I washed the dishes in the sink. Nancy looked out the window, wondering what awaited her. Mom hugged her. "Come on, Nancy, sit down and have another glass of champagne," she said. Dad finally realized that something was wrong between us, but he didn't want to ask questions. We had dinner and drank some more of Dad's expensive champagne. Dad asked how things were going in the center. I told him that profits were getting better and that their pension would increase. We talked for a long time about the center. I told my father about several new plans. Nancy sat drinking champagne and showed no interest in the conversation. Mom and Dad began to get tired. This was a sign for me to leave. I called a taxi because I had drunk too much. Nancy kissed her father on the cheek, then hugged her mother. Dad stood at the other end of the room, waiting for me to tell him something. I hugged my mother tightly, kissed her on both cheeks and forehead. She knew something was wrong because I usually only kissed her on the cheeks. I walked up to my dad, shook his hand, and hugged him tightly. He whispered in my ear, "Son, when you come back tomorrow to get your car, I want to know what happened." "I'll tell you and Mom. Thanks for lunch and tea, and for that expensive champagne you saved," I said. "Son, I have a dozen more bottles, for when the grandchildren come, one day soon." Nancy headed towards the door after hearing what Dad said to me. We got into the taxi and waved goodbye to Mom and Dad. A second later, Nancy began to cry. Christmas night was not the time to talk to Nancy and sort things out. She went to the guest room to sleep and cried. She finally realized the gravity of the situation. Between Christmas and the New Year's party, there was an icy atmosphere in the house. The lawyers closed until next year. Nancy couldn't find a lawyer. I don't know what was on her mind, but she cried a lot. The only thing I could think about was guilt. The next day, I went to pick up the car from my parents' house. I told Mom and Dad all the dirty details, starting with my accident 9 months ago. The father said only one thing: divorce immediately. Mom burst into tears. 2 days before the New Year's party, I went to the police with a recording of a conversation between Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim at dinner. Tom said then, "You know, Jake, it was a great idea to sell these expensive trees at the local market to your friend at half price. How long have we been doing this? 4 years, right?" Jake, Tony, and Jim supported him. "Yes, Jake, that was a great idea. I wouldn't have been able to buy all these expensive things if it weren't for you, Jake. Yeah, let this last for many more years. And don't forget, guys, tonight we'll have sex in front of him again." The police asked me about the last comment if it was true. I answered honestly that yes. "Can you arrest them at the New Year's party? All four are invited," I asked. "Sir, what time does the party start?" asked the policeman. 7 o'clock in the evening. There will be a buffet with free drinks all night," I replied. "In that case, we will arrive at 9:30 to give you time to talk to the rest of the staff. We will be there in time to arrest these four," the policeman said. The atmosphere between Nancy and I continued to be icy, but she had to pretend to be in a good mood for the New Year's party. We were dressed up for the party. I felt that Nancy didn't want to go because she had been served with divorce papers, but she suppressed her feelings and went. When we entered the hall, everyone was surprised. They thought we had made peace, but this was far from the truth. I walked around the hall, talking with the guests. Nancy did the same. The men talked to her, but the wives quickly stopped talking. I looked at my watch, waiting for the police to arrive, and watched the four: Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim. All four stood together. Their wives were on the other side of the hall, talking. The police arrived on time. One of them came up to me in civilian clothes and asked me to point out these four. I pointed. The policeman nodded towards the door, and 8 policemen entered the room. They approached the 4 men and arrested them for theft. "Officer, may I say a few words before you leave with them?" I asked. "Yes, sir, do it quickly," he replied. "You 4 are fired. There's no way you'll get a recommendation from me," I said. With these words, they were taken out of the hall. Amy, Jill, Beth, and June watched as their husbands were taken away and did not know what was happening. They came up to me and asked what happened. I told them that their husbands had been accused of stealing trees and plants for 4 years. I'm going to take them to court. They will be in the police station until next year when the trial takes place. I want them to get prison sentences and reimburse me for the stolen goods at full price, taking into account the annual price increases. Nancy came up to me and asked what was going on, and I told her. We finished the evening and were the last to leave the hall. I went to my room and Nancy went to the guest room. It was time to deal with Nancy. On Sunday evening, I told her the following. "Nancy, get yourself a lawyer on Monday. We're getting a divorce as soon as my lawyer gets everything settled. I talked to a real estate agent to get the house appraised. It's going on the market next week. It's worth $500,000. I told them to put it on the market. It's for $250,000. I want a quick sale. The house is in my name, Nancy. You'll have to find a new place to live. When the house sells, whatever's left will go to the new owner, Nancy. You will receive exactly half of the sale of the house. Our cars are leased. I will cancel the contract on Monday. I will pay for the wear and tear and the remainder of the contract. I will go get our bags as soon as I receive confirmation of the sale of the house. We can live here until that day, and then I'll move right after you. David, can I earn your forgiveness? I don't want a divorce. I love you. I should have not believed the doctors all these months. I'm so sorry for everything I've done. Please, give me a second chance," she said. "Nancy, for 9 months you allowed 4 men to have sex with you. You could see the hatred, anger, rage, and anger in my eyes, but you didn't care. I had to sit and endure it, watching. All these months, like you, what do you think I feel? I now have a wife of easy virtue. And when you returned late from other meetings, I'm sure, with more than one man. And all this makes you a street woman. Find yourself a lawyer, we're getting a divorce. Nancy could not respond to my words. All she could do was hold her head and cry, repeating, I'm so sorry for everything I've done. Too little, too late, I said. David, how will I get to work without a car? She asked. Simple. On foot, by bike, by bus or taxi, that's your problem, not mine, I said. On Monday, Nancy found a lawyer. I went to my corporate lawyer. He said he should take the matter to a divorce lawyer. I went to him and told him the whole dirty story, giving him the tape of Nancy with Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim. Now all that remained was to wait for the court hearing and the punishment of the four. I got to work while eating lunch at Willow's restaurant. Time dragged on without Allison's support. I missed her female company. Then I received an invitation to her wedding. I couldn't miss this for anything. The divorce was slow and I needed female company. This was difficult for me. Nancy ruined my life. One day I went for lunch. One of my salespeople stood up from the table with a woman I had never seen before. He made a deal. The only empty seat was at her table. I asked if I could have a seat since there were no other empty seats. She invited me to sit. I ordered lunch, and she checked the order from the center. I took the chance and offered to check it out. Sometimes there are mistakes, although they are rare. It was a good decision on my part. She handed me the order, and I checked it. You only have 5% off this large order, I said. Yes, that's what the salesman told me. That's all he could offer, she replied. Helen brought me coffee while I was talking to the lady. Helen, can you get Jim Taylor? I said. This gave me more time to talk to her. She was dressed in a business suit, but looked very attractive. Excuse me, sir, why did you call this salesman? She asked. I'm going to make changes. But first of all, I want to invite you to dinner tonight. No strings attached, I offered. She was surprised, but I said it. She looked at me differently, appraising me. I was wearing a business suit, as usual. She thought for a long time about how to answer. I was hoping for a yes. Sir, I don't know your name. Before accepting or not accepting your offer, she said. Excuse me, my name is David. What's yours? She answered with slight awkwardness. Pamela Hughes. How are you? Can I call you Pamela? Call me David, I said. The ice began to melt, and I had a chance to see Pamela alone. Jim Taylor is back. Jim, enter the following changes to this order. It should be 15%, not 5%. I'll check the bill after that. Jim took the order and left. My lunch was served. It was just a light salad. Excuse me, Pamela, would you like something stronger or another coffee while you wait? David, another coffee, please. Jim Taylor returned with a corrected order. Sorry about the mistake, Mr. Willows, Jim said. Thank you, Jim, for your promptness, I replied. The cat was out of the bag. Pamela now knew that I was the owner of Willows Garden Center. Pamela, I hope this doesn't change your mind about having dinner with me tonight, even though you found out that I own the center. No, not at all. I'd love to have dinner with you. Like you said, no strings attached. Do you live nearby, or are you staying at a hotel? I asked Pamela. I live 10 miles from here, on the other side of town, next to my garden store in Richmond. In that case, can I pick you up or send a taxi for you? I know a good restaurant in Richmond. I'd rather you pick me up. Oh God, what did I say? I mean, you would accompany me. Pamela, I know what you mean. Let's say 6:30. Please give me your address or I won't find you. Pamela gave me her address and phone number and then left. I looked after her, hoping that she would turn around. She turned around and smiled. What a smile it was. 6:30 couldn't come faster for me. I arrived in a taxi at 6:15, knocked on the door with a bouquet of flowers. Pamela already saw that the taxi had arrived. She opened the door. My mouth opened wide in surprise. She was so attractive and so charming. I wanted to hug her and kiss her, but it was too early for that. She took the flowers and put them on the table. Then we went to the restaurant. I enjoyed dining in the Richmond area. We stopped at the Royal Oak restaurant. When we entered, "Good evening, Mr. Willows. Is your usual table?" asked the head waiter. "No, please, in a quiet corner," I replied. He took our coats and walked us to our table. "Pamela, are you hungry? I want to offer you 3 delicious dishes. I love seafood, but you can order whatever you want." Pamela said, "I love seafood too." Pamela ordered a shrimp salad, and I ordered 6 oysters. We had 2 bottles of chilled white wine. We then both ordered salmon with a side dish. We both skipped dessert. We talked throughout dinner, and I learned what she sells in her garden store and how she has a hard time making ends meet due to the high cost of the goods. So I offered to help. It was my way of seeing more of her. Dinner went well, but Pamela looked at her watch. "David, I have to go. I need sleep." "Pamela, I'm sorry that I kept you talking. I lost track of time. Let me call a taxi and take you home." On the way to her house, I invited her to dinner the next evening. She said she had to wash her hair. At that moment, I thought it was all over. It was an excuse. Then she said, "But I can go the day after tomorrow," and smiled. With that smile, I wanted to kiss her, but I didn't want to rush. We stopped at her house. I walked her to the door. "David, I forgot to put the flowers you brought in the water. I have to put them in a vase immediately." She opened the door, looked at me, and smiled, saying, "See you at 6:30 in 2 days." Now I had a chance with Pamela. The next evening, we talked about our lives up to that point. I told her that I was in the process of getting a divorce. Pamela said she got divorced 3 months ago. Her husband cheated on her, and she got the store in the divorce. I said, "Do you want to talk to a stranger about this? I don't mind telling you about my problems over the past year." "No, I'll tell you all about myself another time if you want to see me," Pamela said. "In that case, I'll tell you all about me another night, with my problems and what's going on." "How about Friday night at the Royal Oak restaurant?" I asked. We met again at the Royal Oak restaurant. The food was excellent as usual, and Pamela had chosen a great wine. "David, can I start first? I have to tell you about my life before the divorce." "It's a lady's privilege," I said. I ordered 2 large brandies. I had a feeling that Pamela would need a couple of drinks. Pamela told me about her 2 novels. One lasted a month. Her marriage lasted 14 months before she found out that her husband was cheating. They divorced 3 months ago. Pamela was very strong all this time, but tears still appeared in her eyes when she told her story. It was torture for her. She spoke for about 2 hours. She wiped away her tears, and her makeup was smeared. She was even more beautiful with tears on her face. It was late. I took Pamela home in a taxi. She was still depressed. I tried to apologize for ruining the evening. I decided to change my mood and took the first chance. "Pamela, can I kiss you on the cheek before I leave?" "Yes." Damn, I wanted more. But I fell in love with Pamela a few days ago, and she didn't even know about it. 6:30 on a Saturday night at the Royal Oak restaurant, and you order, I said. Dinner was great, then we left the restaurant. Pamela entered and closed the door. I stood there. I heard a dull knock outside the door. Pamela cried, screaming, "Why didn't I meet David years ago? I love him, love him, love him. He's such a gentleman." I wanted to knock and hug her. I got into a taxi and was in another world until I returned home. It was a busy day at the garden center. I told my manager that I needed to leave. I wanted to get ready and look my best for my meeting with Pamela. I had a lot to tell her. I picked up Pamela and we went to the restaurant. Both ordered soup and steak. We had 2 bottles of red wine. Pamela was quiet most of the evening. She was probably still worried about what she told me the day before. I was in love with her, and I didn't care what she said. "David, I was in bad company tonight, but I've been thinking a lot. Take my hand, and tell me about your problems." I ordered 2 double expensive glasses of brandy. We drank the remaining red wine. "Pamela, what I'm about to tell you might change your opinion of me, but I have to take a chance, so here it is. I told Pamela everything, starting with the car accident. All about Allison, how she brought me back to life. The most hated part was about how Nancy cheated on me. Pamela listened to me in silence, drank brandy, and one of mine. She then stood up and ran to the ladies' room, getting some tissues. David, you ruined everything, I told myself. Half an hour passed and Pamela returned. David, please take me home. I had to bring her home. I wanted to know what she thought about what I told her. Pamela quickly entered and did not look back. My head fell. I was now in my own hell of self-pity. You shouldn't have told her about your problems. I returned home, so to speak, and ended the night getting drunk. 2 weeks passed. Every day I called Pamela 3 times a day. I thought it was all over. On Friday, Pamela called me. This brought tears to my eyes, living in the hope that she wants to see me. David, would you like to have dinner tonight? I'll treat you, Pamela said. Yes. Do you like Chinese food? Love lol. I'll order food from my favorite restaurant. What do you like? Chinese soup and chicken chow mein. Great, I love it too. See you at 6. You can bring the bottle, Pamela said. I went to Willow's and picked up 2 bottles of red and white wine. Then I went to a candy store and bought a box of chocolates. Then a large bouquet of red roses happily returned to the office. My secretary smiled at me, knowing that I had a date. At 4 I headed home. At 5:45 I drove up to her house in a taxi, thinking that we would go to a restaurant. He struggled to the door, holding bottles of red and white wine, a box of chocolates, and a bouquet of red roses. Pamela opened the door, kissed me on the cheek, and took the bouquet. I paid for the taxi, and at the same second, a delivery man from a Chinese restaurant arrived with the food I ordered. We sat down at the table to eat while the food was hot and drank some wine. Pamela explained why she didn't answer my calls. Her ex-husband was stalking her. We talked until 10 in the evening, and Pamela invited me to go with her to the bedroom. I woke up at 6 in the morning and Pamela was still sleeping. I got out of bed and knelt next to her when she woke up. Pamela, this may not be the best position to propose, but will you marry me? I asked, crossing my fingers. Yes, 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 she replied. Over the weekend, our love was everything. On Monday, I went to see my divorce lawyer. I wanted everything to go as quickly as possible. That day, he asked me why my parents included a special clause in their will for Willow's Garden Center before I took control of it. I told him he needed to ask my parents about it. He did just that. There were 2 things left to do: get a divorce and marry Pamela. At the trial, Nancy demanded that Willow's Garden Center be sold in order to get a lot of money. But my lawyer was ready for such a request. The judge, after hearing both sides and viewing Nancy's tape, decided not to sell the center. Nancy only received half the value of our house. She was also ordered to pay court costs. The divorce was finalized, and I was finally free from this cheater. A week passed, and Pamela and I got married. My parents and Allison and her future husband were present at the ceremony. We made a promise to each other to always tell the truth, both good and bad, throughout our lives. My father told me, "Son, I still have a dozen bottles of that expensive champagne that I've been saving for when my grandchildren come. One day soon." Pamela looked at me and said, "It's like they read my mind. I want 2 children of both sexes." When I met Pamela's parents, our parents immediately hit it off and even went on vacation together. Pamela and I enjoyed a happy married life. Pamela sold her gardening store and became my right hand at the center. We attended Allison's wedding and thanked her for the coffee shop. She said she would have to charge me for the coffee to make a profit. Of course, it was a joke. Jake, Tom, Tony, and Jim were convicted. They had to reimburse me for the cost of the stolen trees and plants. My parents got what they wanted after a few years. We always had a nanny on hand for their 4 grandchildren who could have asked for more. Grandparents argued on weekends over who would look after their grandchildren. We didn't interfere because we were absorbed in each other. We let them figure it out on their own. As for the famous 4, Jake became a window cleaner with one ladder, bucket, rag, and squeegee. I tried to live on modest means. Nancy moved in with him, and they got married. This marriage lasted only 3 years. Nancy found out he was cheating. Nancy also cheated on Jake behind his back. They broke up, and I lost track of her. But I bet she's still doing her thing. As for Amy, Jake's ex-wife, I heard that she is on the streets and may one day meet a sad end. Tom and Tony started a car washing business by going door to door washing other people's cars. For some time, it was difficult for them to make ends meet, but luck turned their way, so to speak. In one of the cars, they found a briefcase full of money. Naturally, they used the money to buy a small building, filled it with goods, bought 2 trucks, and garaged them in this building. One night, the building burned down. They were accused of arson. As for Jill and Beth, they returned to Tom and Tony, but did not remarry them. All 4 lived together, and the exchange of partners became the norm for them. Jill and Beth were caught cheating with other men behind Tom and Tony's back and were kicked out. I felt sorry for Jim. I thought about bringing him back to work, but Jake talked him out of it. As for Jim, he suffered a nervous breakdown and, unfortunately, will remain so for the rest of his life. But his ex-wife June returned to him because of his condition. Jim lived in his own world, but June remarried him. At the wedding, Jim could only utter the words, "I do." She turned out to be a real woman of easy virtue, gave birth to 2 children from another man, and registered them with Jim. What a lying cheater. I can say one thing. Thanks to my accident, I learned the truth about Nancy. She turned out to be a woman of easy virtue. But most importantly, I found a loving wife.